Well, Poddies, it is Friday already. How exciting is that? I don't know about you, but I feel like this week has gone so incredibly quickly. And we are heading into, believe it or not, the Halloween weekend. Okay, we're not really heading into it just yet, but we're almost there. Okay, we're almost there. And I do have a secret obsession with Halloween for many reasons. Fancy dress, free sweets. Everyone's listening thinking, oh my God, Jess, you're 30 now. You can't go trick or treating anymore. I'm going to prove you wrong. So today I've got a really awesome guest and I'm so excited to have him on the show. It's been a really interesting episode to record on many levels. So we have the incredible Jeffery Shaw on today, and he is talking all about branding and authenticity and how we actually dig down into authenticity in order to build more up. And it's been such an interesting conversation for me because there are so many layers to it. It's not a case of just listening in and going, oh yeah, well, you know what? Let's talk about visuals. Let's talk about his previous career as a portrait photographer. It's about digging into and challenging actually some beliefs around ideal clients and how we actually choose our ideal clients and how who we are impacts that particular choice. Another interesting piece for me that came up was actually this idea around what we need in our businesses to succeed. You know, and actually Jeffery and I were having this really cool conversation off air. I wish we had recorded it. But once you've listened to the episode, you'll kind of understand where we were coming from around how these pieces, how all of this ties together, this idea around how you can be authentically you and how that impacts the rest of your business. It impacts the branding, it impacts your marketing, it impacts your sales. And it's so cool to see somebody else be able to tie it in a way that's simple and easy to understand. So that was something for me that I just took away and thought, yeah, I'm really fired up. And it actually reminded me a lot of the episode that we did with Jay Bayer about talk triggers earlier this year, you know, and really thinking about how do we get into the heads of our ideal clients and not just how can we look for the people that are going to pay us the most necessarily. And then finally, one of the most interesting things that came up when we were actually talking about ideal clients during this conversation is about the link between who we are as business owners and who we decide to sell to. So obviously a lot of you guys will know that we have, or I am running my first Selling to Corporates event next month. I'm very excited. In fact, by the time that this episode goes live, it will only be 2 weeks until that event actually happens. And I'm really excited about it. And I get really excited about entrepreneurs being able to sell to corporate organizations. And it's something that we touched upon in this episode with Jeffery, who does that incredibly successfully, you know, and who spans that link between being a really successful keynote speaker. He was one of the, he was actually the top speaker at ProfitCon this year as voted by the audience. He sells regularly to entrepreneurs, he coaches, and yet he's also being brought into these incredible companies like Twitter, for example, and, you know, talking to them about how they can improve their HR, how they can improve their hiring processes through learning how to really understand their end user, their end client, and what they're actually looking for. So if you have been thinking about attending the Selling to Corporates event and you've been a little bit on the fence, you're not quite sure whether it's for you, take a listen to this episode, take a listen to how Jeffery describes how he works with both sets of ideal clients, and think about whether or not that's something that you want to make work in your business. And if it is, then make sure that you check out the Selling to Corporates event page. The link is in the show notes. So you can go and have a look at that. And if we do have any tickets left, then you'll be able to grab one of those and I will see you. I'll get to hug you in person. Oh my goodness, in just 2 weeks' time. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. Okay, Poddies, how exciting is this? From the intro, you can tell how excited I am about this particular guest. So Jeffery, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm very excited. I'm excited on a number of levels about this because one of the things that I got really jazzed about, which obviously is a clear Brit term over here, was the fact that you used to be a portrait photographer for some incredible people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of came into this crazy internet marketing world. How
Yeah.
does that happen?
I get asked that a lot. It's funny. I think for a lot of us, like to me, it makes perfect sense. But I guess from the outside world, it always is. How did that happen? So, I think it's a combination of things. And truthfully, it's taken me a while to unpack it and fully understand it as well. Because on the surface, if you will, it made perfect sense because I built this very successful business as a portrait photographer for very affluent people and did so for 35 years. And, I realized that I built my business in a unique way. And that became the subject matter, and the strategies of how I built that business became the topic of my book, Lingo. So on the surface, it made sense. Like when you've been successful at something and you went about it a unique way, why not share that skill and that strategy? However, what has continued to unfold for me is how being a photographer helped me master a certain skill set and bring out, really kind of leverage innate qualities in myself that help me now as a brand consultant and a keynote speaker in ways that I didn't know at the time. So for example, a phrase that I use a lot is that what I try to do in my branding work, the companies I work with, my objective is to build their business in a way that their customers feel seen. Similarly to the way a photographer makes their subject feel seen. So now I can realize that. So on the surface, it was just a way of, it made sense that I had a unique strategy to be able to building a business, but underneath that, the real juice of that transition from photographer to brand consultant and speaker and podcast host and all the things I do is that I have an innate ability to make people feel seen and then also to synthesize information. I look at the world as a photographer, I look at it as naturally in pieces. I photograph, by the way, entirely on location. So when I show up on a photo shoot, I've got various elements to deal with. And my brain naturally synthesizes the pieces to create a whole. And that is very much a skill set that is needed in branding because it's not just one directional. It's the customer's needs, it's your values as a business. And then how does that synthesize together? So I think it actually, for me, to summarize it, if you will, I think it's really been a lesson on getting in touch with your innate gifts
Mm-hmm.
and leveraging them to the highest point.
That's really interesting. I really like that piece around the innate gifts because I think sometimes it can be hard, particularly when you've been operating in the online space for a little while. Sometimes we actually forget what those are because we get so caught up in what other people are doing and in what they say is going to work. For example, I had a client who came to me recently and said that they'd been told by somebody that their industry wasn't going to be profitable and that they should just turn around and quit and become a business coach like everybody else. And I think that can be quite disheartening. So it's nice to hear somebody say that you should absolutely trust in what you're good at, but also that those skills can be applied to a slightly different area or can be pivoted to do something a bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really powerful what you're saying and I think this is uniquely challenging in online business, truthfully, because there are so many gurus, if you will. But I think even in addition to that, it's also, there's a science to online marketing and there is a science to human behavior as well. So it becomes really hard to dispute what science has told us works. And of course, online marketing has been tested and people find that this is the right lead magnet, this is the funnel, this is the process. And it's hard to argue with that. It's very hard. I know when I had an online course a couple of years ago, and in the development of that, I kind of had to hit both sides of the wall, right? On one hand, when I did it fully how I instinctively felt it should be done, it didn't sell as well. And when I followed the rules of online marketing, it sold better, but I felt creepy. So I had to find my own voice in there. So I think often, sometimes you have to hit the walls on both sides to find your comfortable spot. My answer, here's how I guide my coaching clients is we live in an age when it is impossible to turn off all the information. That instead of alienating yourself from the possibilities of what's available for you to learn, instead of focusing on separating yourself or alienating yourself, focus instead on increasing your filter of discernment. So deciding what matters to you. So take it all in, because it's hard to avoid. There's a lot of experts in all these fields. Take it in and then really drop into yourself and decide what works for me. What's best for how do I want to be in the world? What's best for my brand voice? And that's what I refer to as the filter of discernment.
I really like that. I really like that. And in fact, it's actually something I was talking about with some of my students in the Evolve program today. And we were talking about this idea that you can absolutely consume every piece of information, paid or free content on the internet. But actually, the most important thing is about tailoring it to you. What are you going to get out of it? And what's the one thing that you will implement or tailor to implement for your own business? So I think that's so important. And like you say, it can be hard to cut through the noise. I think, it's very difficult, not necessarily to know who's good these days, but actually to know who resonates most with you, and know how similar, in effect, their business model is to yours.
Yeah, it is. And at the same time, most of us are on a path and journey to find, actually, let me reframe that, to uncover our own authenticity, because it's already there. That's why I kind of resist from using the word find. It's not like you're looking for something from outside yourself. The fact of the matter is, your authentic brand voice, your authentic way of marketing, your authentic way of putting yourself out in the world is already there. It's just greatly influenced by all this information. And you kind of need to constantly step in. But I said there's too much valuable information to ignore it. So I don't know that that's an answer. I mean, there are people that just like, I'm just going to shut off social media and not pay any attention. And it's like, oh, I don't know that that's the answer, but how can you increase the skill of being able to really drop into yourself and drop into your own authenticity and find your sweet spot there? And like I said, I'm a professional speaker, I'm a keynote speaker, and I have found this really difficult in the world of speaking because there's so much good sound advice on how to get speaking gigs and how to be a good speaker and how to perform on stage. You kind of had to take it in, but it's a constant process of finding your uniqueness in that, so that the ultimate objective is to stand out from everybody else. If you do it just like everybody else, you're going to be like everybody else.
No, I completely agree. And I think it's actually interesting because when I was doing some research into you and the kind of phrases and things that come up, the one of the biggest takeaways I had was actually this piece around the new know, like, trust factor. It's really interesting because obviously we're talking about, let's tailor the information to you. Let's understand how we can, dig into what feels authentic for us. And actually, it's really interesting from a marketing perspective to look at the know, like, trust factor that has been prevalent in the market and has been traditionally the way that people sell to us through, building up that know, like, trust factor. And you said something really great. I'm gonna let you say it because obviously it'll sound much better coming from you.
Yeah. So
you made this really great point about it that I think is so valuable.
Yeah, the goal in marketing and branding and customer service and customer relationships, the goal in all aspects of, I'll say business, but it's true in life too, is to make people feel like, wow, it's like you're in my head. That's a whole other goal. And I think, to your point, know, like, and trust has been what we've been talking about a long time, as has been buyer personas and avatars. It's just not enough today, to have a precursory understanding of people to the point that you call them a buyer persona or an avatar isn't enough. People want to feel that you know more about them than their demographic, statistic, and even their behavior. People also want to feel more for you than know, like, and trust you. That's like bare minimum of what we need to actually feel about somebody. Know, like, and trust, it's a bare minimum. And I don't know that it's going to get me over the fence to do business with anybody. But if you make me feel like, wow, it's like you're in my head. Like my sense as a consumer is that you have such a deep empathetic understanding of who I am, that it's related. Maybe at some point in your life, you've walked in my shoes, or maybe you still do, or I just want to feel like, wow, you really get me. The headline on my website is businesses that get their customers get better customers. And that's the, wow, it's like you're in my head. Like, that to me should be what we're striving for. Is like, I want to develop marketing materials. I want to present myself and how I can influence an audience as a speaker. Everything I do it from the lens of how can I let this decision maker know that I have such a deep understanding of their objective, and if they're an event planner or such, what the objective of their audience is. So my guarantee, if you will, when I'm speaking to an event planner is I want that event planner who's considering hiring me to speak to feel that I am going to have such a deep understanding of their audience. Their audience is going to feel like, wow, it's like this guy's really in my head. That's the goal.
And that's a huge thing. I mean, it's also a huge undertaking from the part of a speaker or, you know, even a podcast guest or interviewee.
Right.
What is it, or how is it that you get into the mind of those customers?
So I love that question, because actually there's a strategy to it, but there's also, you know, so much of, gosh, how do I even say this? My objective in all the consulting work I do, brand consulting, for example, is to help businesses attract their ideal customer. So I really focus on the word ideal. So I want the ideal guest on my podcast. I want to be the ideal guest for your podcast. I want to speak in front of my ideal audience. When we don't strive for that and there's a misalignment, you're barking up the wrong tree. Then you're actually trying to, so another slide I use in my keynotes is actually my most tweeted slide. I sit there and watch all the cameras come out because it changes people's minds on this, is that it's not your job to prove your value to anyone. It is your job to find the people who already value what you do.
I like that.
So as a speaker, for example, the last thing I want to do is be in front of an audience who isn't already aligned with my way of thinking, because then I'm going to spend an hour trying to prove what I'm saying. Where you want to get everybody on board as quickly as possible, whether it's an audience as a speaker or it's an audience of the marketing you're putting out there. So for one, it starts with having a much more focused plan on only reaching whatever is ideal to you, the ideal customer, the ideal audience. Then when you know who, so in my book, Lingo, one of the strategies, when I talk about determining your ideal customer, I go about it backwards, because the way I suggest you go about it is that your ideal customer is a reflection of yourself. So before you can, in order to define your ideal audience, you first have to really clearly define whom you're meant to serve. What are your innate characteristics? What do you bring to the table that's unique? What is it that you love to do? What is it that, your special gifts that come so easy to you? What are those things? And then ask yourself the fundamental question, who will love that? Right? So then you're creating alignment to whom you're marketing to or speaking to in the first place. And then once you determine whom you're meant to serve, dive deep. Understand everything about them. It may be where you are at this point in your life. It may be where you've been at other points in your life. It may be someplace you never were, but you know that that's who you're meant to serve. So to give a tangible example of this, the whole basis of my book, Lingo, is my story of how I built my photography business. I grew up lower middle class in a small country town, but realized through a matter of certain circumstances that I was meant to serve very affluent people as their family photographer. Not because I thought affluence was the road to riches or anything like that, but I realized that I had a set of values innate to who I was. I was a very long-term thinker. I always thought, I've had life insurance since I was 19. Like, I've always thought really far ahead. And I realized that I grew up in a lower middle class community where people couldn't plan ahead because they didn't have the money to plan ahead. When you don't have money, you can't plan ahead. So I needed to find the people who had the financial means to plan ahead, because those were going to be the people I wanted to serve, because I was going to provide portraits for them that they would hand down for generations. So there was an alignment of values. When I realized that's who I was meant to serve, I realized it wasn't a world that I knew at all, but I could serve them if I understood their world. So I went about a journey to understand what it felt like to be a wealthy person, even though I wasn't one. So it was an empathetic approach to business with a deep understanding of who they were, and then I built a business that would attract them. So there's a strategy to it as well. I mean, there's first a dropping into yourself, but then there is a strategy you can apply to actually deeply understand the people that you're trying to reach.
And I think it's so interesting because I think, traditionally when we talk about ideal clients and finding ideal clients, people look at where are they, what do they wear, what do they read, da, 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 da. And it's not very often that we actually think about ourselves in that process. What I love there is that
Right.
you've actually thought about, or who am I as a person, and use that to help refine who that ideal client actually is. And that's really interesting because we
Yeah.
don't do it often. We don't take ourselves into account. The other interesting thing about that is that, I love what you said about, it's not that I was looking, or I thought affluent people had particularly different skills or anything, is that one of the biggest questions that I get asked most often is, how do I find high ticket clients? And
Mhm.
it's one of the things that, simultaneously frustrates me and makes me giggle, because ultimately it's not necessarily even about finding the people that will pay you the most. Sometimes in some businesses, depending on your model, it's about the people who will pay you most often, and
Yeah.
depending on what you're actually trying to build and depending on the kind of person you are and how you want to show up in your business is going to depend on the model and ultimately the kind of price point that's defined by those customers.
Yes. So it's a combination. It really is a blend of, I guess you have to have a spark of shared values,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I would have young photographers come to me all the time and reach out to me and want to emulate my business
Yeah.
because so many people say, to your point, that they want to reach the high end customer. Why? Because you think it's the road to riches?
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what? If that's the energy you're holding, if you're thinking, I want to build a business, a high ticket business, because that will make me rich, that is exactly the energy that rich people smell a mile away. I mean, you have to understand, like, fundamentally, affluent people are so accustomed to being a target. They are a target for everybody that wants to sell them anything. They're a target for manipulate. They're a target even, if they don't have trusted staff who could steal from them, or financial advisors who misled them. Like, I mean, affluent people are a target for people that think that they are an easy way in their own lives. And affluent people can smell it a mile away, which is why something like Bernie Madoff, when that whole thing happened here in the US, that was shocking to me. And I had 5 clients that lost a phenomenal amount of money. I mean, one client alone of mine lost 5 homes to
That's
bankruptcy
crazy.
because of all the money they lost. And that shocked me because, I was amazed that people didn't smell him out.
Mm.
But that goes to show how good he was at manipulation. And and I know how incredible he would have had to have been, because I know how sophisticated affluent people are and a bit cautious. They're extremely cautious because they're so used to being a target. So the person that comes to me that says, hey, I want to build a photography business like you because I want to work with affluent people and be a high ticket photographer, because they're holding that as their objective, they're never going to make it. I was coming from a place of genuine values. If you had asked me I was 23 years old, if you had asked me what a lot of money meant, I would have thought it was breaking the 6-figure barrier. Like, to me, 23 years old and in the 80s, to do 6 figures meant you were phenomenally successful. Truthfully, when I got into the world, I realized I never could have fathomed how wealthy the clients were going to be that I was serving. I couldn't. We're talking people that have mortgages of $50,000 a month and 25,000 square foot homes. Like, that was not comprehensible to me because that's not what I was going for. I truly was setting out in the world as a photographer, when I was recreating my business, to work with the people who I knew had shared values.
Mm.
I was looking for the people that had the financial means to invest in the future, who would want to have portraits to hand down to their children, that had the financial means to capture every beautiful moment in the life of their family. I needed those folks. I couldn't continue to work with the people who had to make a choice between photographs or putting a meal on the table. I can't build a business on that.
And also, like you say, if it doesn't fit in with who you are, and obviously you're somebody who plans ahead and
Right.
likes to be, I'm not going to use the phrase risk averse because that's always quite offensive to people, but in terms of like long-term planning and actually knowing where you want to go, it doesn't actually meet your values either,
Yeah.
because people who perhaps are struggling in that way wouldn't understand why you like to be the way that you are with regards to your investments and how you're taking care of your future.
Right. In fact, I would say it's the opposite of risk adverse, because at 23 years old, when I had a light bulb moment that I was barking up the wrong tree, I was in my hometown, upstate New York, trying to build a business for people that would never get it. I took the biggest risk possible because I asked myself a really fundamental question, which was, this is my hometown. I had never ventured outside of my hometown. Do I stay here and change everything about who I am as a person and to build a business that matches the market? Or do I trust and believe there's somebody in the world that values what I do and take the risk that I will find them, that I will build a business for them, and that I will be successful? And I took that risk. I left my hometown. I left everything about it. I left the mentalities behind. I left family ties, not in a relationship way, but in emotionally. Like, I left those things in a family that sometimes tie you back, those values and the things that keep us small. I took the biggest risk of all and said, I'm not going to change who I am to succeed in business. It wasn't worth it to me. I was going to bring out more of who I am and find the people that valued it at the risk of complete failure. So being truthful to who we are and being authentic is, honestly, it's the biggest risks we can take.
I also think it's one of the most difficult things to do, particularly if you look at it from a business perspective, certainly from a sales standpoint. If you're going to be authentic to who you are, sometimes that means saying no to clients. And that means saying, no, you wouldn't be the right fit client for me, or I wouldn't be the right fit person to help you. And that can be really difficult for people, because ultimately we all want to help people, we all want to work with people, we all want to make money. But, have you ever had a challenge where you felt like in order to stay authentic, you've had to turn down an opportunity or turn down a client, and found that that's challenging?
All the time. I mean, that's one of the core tenets from which I speak of now. I mean, I travel the country speaking to groups of executives and companies and CEOs. And one of the first things I ask them is, what percentage of your customers do you feel are your ideal customer? And every business says, I want it to be all of them, but if I'm truthful with myself, it's like 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I always it begs the question, why? And usually it's because they don't know how to say no, or some money is better than no money, or God forbid, so many people have bought into the Pareto principle that says 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers. And my answer to that is, well, while that may be mathematically accurate to a degree, like in today's world, do you really have time to waste your time on 8 out of 10 customers? If only 2 out of 10 are providing all the income, then what the hell are you doing with the other 8? Like, what a waste of time. So, I'm accustomed to a business where all your customers are ideal and all your customers pay off. So, yes, you have to say no, but here's the thing. And I do get asked this often. You only have to say no for a short period of time, because once you've carved out the lane for which you are known for, you're only attracting people that fit into that lane. So you're only saying no for a very short period of time. Statistically speaking, the people I photographed, I actually, a few years ago, when the whole term, the 1% became popular, meaning the 1% income earners in the United States, statistically speaking, my photography clientele is less than 0.5% of that 1%. So that means I know, like I wear it almost as a badge of honor that I need to say no to 99.5% of the population. So
That's crazy, isn't it?
it is, but but you only have to say no for so long, because I may have said no in the beginning. I may have said no to, people that used to know who I was as a photographer, but then eventually I became so known for my lane as, a high-end photographer for affluent people that did an amazing job and photographed them in a way that really resonated for the way they wanted to be in the world. And I had such a button-down business. It was a life of yeses. There was nobody, my life became kind of insular, if you will, which is the objective. So only the people that I was meant to serve even knew I existed. Anybody outside of that severe, even in my own industry. The first time I was asked to speak at a national convention for photographers, I told the organizers that the problem is nobody in the photography world knows I exist. I said, so how do we get people to show up? And we worked on that together for a year prior to my speaking gig, because nobody in the industry knew I existed, because I had created a business that was so insular on my ideal customers. It wasn't about impressing other photographers. It wasn't even about serving people who weren't my ideal customers. So you only have to say no for a little while. And then once you carve out your lane, it's a life of yeses.
It's brilliant, isn't it? And I mean, I think as well, saying no does get easier over time if you know you're doing it for the right reasons. You know, obviously, if you're trying to be or trying to stay authentic to who you are, and you're doing the very best for somebody, if they're not the right ideal client for you, it would be more irresponsible for you to actually turn around and say, yeah, sure, I'll just take you on, that's
Right.
cool, and pretend that you can help them, or feel like you'll figure it out, versus actually just turning around and saying, you know what, that's not in my wheelhouse, but let me recommend you to somebody who could help.
Correct. Yeah, it's all about fit. I know we use the word in business fit more often, but
Mm.
really it's a valuable term, because it's like, well, I'm just not the right fit for you, but let me refer to you somebody who is. And then now you're putting on good karma in the world and hopefully helping somebody else. And again, it's the same modality I deal with today as far as being a speaker. It's like, I don't want to take the risk of being on a stage in front of an audience that I'm not a fit for.
Mm.
I had great reservations, for example, when I started getting asked to speak in companies, because I have a lifelong experience as an entrepreneur. I don't understand the corporate world. But I really owned who I was and said, well, actually what the corporate world wants is my entrepreneurial attitude.
Mm.
So again, it was another opportunity to not shy away from who I was and try to be somebody else, but to say, hey, this is who I am, and let me figure out where this can serve. Right now, I mean, my main topic is branding and marketing, but I'm getting hired to speak at a lot of events about HR and recruiting employees, because companies are trying to figure out the mindset of millennials. The problem is that they don't understand the lingo of millennials. So I'm using my very same mindset and strategies and helping companies to hire their ideal employees. And I'm speaking at HR events. Now, again, it's a world I never saw myself in, but when the opportunity presents itself, the first thing I ask is, can I fit into this world? And if I can't, then I don't. But if I can, if I see how I can fit in and I can do my own investigative reporting to have a more empathetic view of those I'm serving, I'll do it. But I try to stay away from, I will say no to where I don't fit in.
I think that's interesting on two levels. One, because apparently I'm a millennial, so it's good to know that we're still tricky to talk to. That makes me happy,
Yes.
on so many levels. But also the uh, straddling of the line between selling to entrepreneurs and selling to corporate companies, or working with those different types of ideal client. And that's something that's interesting. We actually um, are holding an event about selling to corporate companies, because that's my background. I come from a consultancy background, and it is very different. The
Mm-hmm.
two worlds are incredibly different, particularly from how you present yourself as a personal brand. Because, you know, back in the day when I was working in corporate companies, I remember coming into the online space and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so vanilla. I'm so diplomatic in the way that I talk now, and I don't want to offend anyone. And, you know, it was very difficult to actually get those opinions out there and talk to a different end user, and be okay with being that level of authentic. But companies now are embracing that. They're embracing that difference. They're trying to bring people in to do things differently, because they recognize ultimately what they've been doing for years and years and years doesn't work in the same way anymore. You know, and I
Right.
think that's a really interesting thing, that your concepts around how we interact with others, how we look at ourselves within that process, it's just a really interesting way to tie it in. Because, you know, traditionally, again, we're told one ideal client all the time for the lifetime of your business, not two potentially very different ones.
Yeah, I think there's an overriding theme here that kind of ties together what you're asking about the no's, and that is, I can imagine people listening in and business owners thinking to themselves that, but I need the money.
Mm.
Maybe I'm startup, maybe et cetera, but things aren't going as well as I'd like. I need the money. So when they, and that's the problem. When people need the business, they try to fit themselves into shapes and forms that they don't belong, and trying to take work on that they're not a perfect fit for. And when you do that, it deteriorates your own sense of worth. And maybe it becomes, when it's not a fit, I think those are nightmare clients. So that become, it just deteriorates you. And as hard as it is to say no, saying no and creating a business for the people that you are a fit for will in the end give you a faster result of being financially stable enough that you can say no. So as hard as it is to say no in the beginning, I think it's really important to do so that you get to ultimately where you want to get to quicker. And certainly more stable in the long run, because you've built a business that you're working with people who are always a fit for you.
I really love that. Thank you so much for this today. This has been so interesting. And I know, a ton of golden nuggets that people are going to take out of this and apply. And obviously you've got your incredible book, Lingo, which I have already purchased a copy of, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting for it to arrive. Amazon clearly is not having the best couple of days.
Yeah.
But where else can people find you? Where can they get more Jeffery?
Sure. Well, jefferyshaw.com is my primary URL. All the links will be there for social. I'm pretty active on social, so you'll find me there as well. The book Lingo can be found anywhere books are found, audiobooks. There's also a page called thelingobook.com, which will give you a background as to why I wrote the book. And it will also provide the links to all the avenues, or most of the avenues, for which you can buy the book.
I love it. Thank you ever so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And guys, if you have enjoyed this interview, please let us know how we did. Head over onto social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you know where we are, and let us know what your key takeaway was. And if you do pick up the book, let us know that as well, because, we may have to start some kind of Smart Leader Sell book club and cover that one off first. Jeffery, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Jess. Thank you for having me.
No, you're so welcome. And guys, I will see you in Monday's episode.